Hello, my name is Billy Gorter, and I'm the Executive Director of This Life. Can I start out by saying a big thank you to everyone involved in the webinar for inviting me today. It's always a great pleasure to share our experiences, especially this one. So This Life is an international NGO based in Cambodia. One of the primary things we do at This Life is listen. We listen to communities and hear what they are saying. It's true, we hear and we learn from things that work in communities, from those people who live within them. In doing so, we help communities find their voice and we support them to use the ideas to shape and change the world that they live in. So a number of years ago, we were talking with people in communities about children who found themselves in conflict with the law. It happens everywhere, we know. However, from our conversations, we discovered that communities thought the way that children were being punished was both inappropriate and wrong. We learned that many young people faced long sentences in overcrowded prisons for minor non-violent misdemeanor offences. We also learned from other things that spending long periods of time in prison effectively ruined their chances of developing education. Basic reading and writing skills perished. We learned from health problems and other explicit risks, which, to be frank, children and young people shouldn't have to face in any setting in the 21st century. In time, this conversation developed further. So This Life commissioned a primary research project. So the project attempted to perception test the value of diversion, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, which is community-based programs of action that are used as alternatives to sentencing to prison. And again, it's worth noting here that we're talking about children and young people who commit minor non-violent offences, and this is a case study from Cambodia. So we thought our research might reveal a lot of objections to this concept, but no, there was really no hesitation or resistance to this at all. So in Cambodia, the law on juvenile justice came into force in 2017. Indeed, the law does state that detention before and after conviction should be the last resort for children. Unfortunately, since then, things haven't quite evolved in quite the same spirit. In fact, we've seen a tripling of children and young people enter prison in Cambodia over the last 3 years. There's a number of ways to explain this, but for now, let me explain it like this. It's difficult to see change unfold on a daily basis, but over time it becomes clear. Cambodia has changed. The urban centres have grown and the rural districts have dwindled. New housing developments and consumption patterns are promoted through new forms of mass media. Alcohol consumption has risen exponentially in line with multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns that target young people across every sensory landscape. In line with modest increases in disposable income, recreational drug use is now common. Young people's lifestyles and aspirations have changed, especially amongst the urban dwellers. At the same time, and set against all of this, is the volume of poverty that eclipses the middle-class world. Cambodia is still characterized by some of the poorest communities in Southeast Asia. In this environment, multiple deprivation is raw and real. In recent years, the Cambodian government has ramped up a crackdown on a perceived drugs problem. Within this context, many children and young people from varying backgrounds have been caught in the same net. So now we have displaced one problem with another. There's abundance of evidence to illustrate the heightened risks that being in prison has on an individual's life, both short, medium, and long term. This needs no defense. It's largely because of the toxic elements often exist within prison settings, which are completely at odds with the core principles of justice, which are the loss of liberty and rehabilitation. So following this is just a list of common risks that we know are associated with incarceration, particularly for children. Extreme overcrowding of prison cells leads to mental health risks. Poor nutrition and lack of exercise leads to physical health risks. Person-to-person bullying and sexual assault, illicit drug use, gang and criminal association, increased criminal awareness amongst prisoners, limited education and development opportunities, identity loss and stigma ownership, leading to broken relations, and future employment barriers. As I mentioned earlier, these are risks supplementary to the loss of liberty that children and young people shouldn't have to face in any setting in the 21st century. So from our research, we recognize the drivers of crime. Drugs, recreational drug use, and addiction related were a primary root cause. Theft was linked to drug-related addiction. Theft was also linked to poverty, with crimes of personal desperation also acting as a root cause. Upon assessment, we noted a majority of convictions were for non-violent offences, mostly drug-related and theft. 64% of cases, children said drug use had led them to commit crimes. In summary, we noted that young people from poor families who had an incomplete education were extremely vulnerable to conviction. Now back to the communities who we serve and who we work with, and whose the agenda this was developed upon. We noted that there was a majority view amongst community members that prisons per se were bad places for children to be. A minority view, though, thought that children who committed non-violent crimes should be sent to prison. We don't know why some community members took this view. They may have been victims of crime, resulting in perhaps a compassion breakdown. We just don't know. However, from talking to community members, we were able to identify a number of sentiments that combined helped us to shift our mindset towards a future value for diversion. Community members recognized both the impacts and the outcome of prison on children. They recognized that the disruption of basic education, combined with the impact of those toxic elements I mentioned earlier, resulted in children and young people that never quite caught up, never really recovered, and found future opportunities were never, ever really the same. Our research activities also spoke with other communities, the professional communities, the village chiefs, the prison, the police, lawyers and judges. These are the very communities that on a daily basis work, observe, process, defend, prosecute and administer the law. From discussions with these communities, we found unanimous support for the juvenile justice law, as they were equally supportive of the use of diversion as an alternative to prison. I sense that they too know that the real impact and the outcomes of prison is for children, especially from low income and multi-deprived communities. So in Cambodia, there's no unemployment benefits paid here. There's no state housing offered. There's no statutory youth services or probation services. The healthcare and education system is fragile, no more so now given the pressures of COVID-19. Community work isn't really viewed as a real profession, and social work is a relatively new qualification, with low numbers of graduates slowly populating the urban and rural environments in that order. This has resulted in a large amount of welfare support being developed and delivered by a diverse range of local and international third sector organisations, such as charities, foundations, and NGOs. At this point of time, it really is what it is. However, from both our research and wider discussions with the government, we are reassured that NGOs are valued and viewed favourably and have a key role to play in the future in helping to support authorities to develop and implement those alternative pathways that divert children away from the destructive risks of prison. So now, if we only measure things in the short term and only measure things in dollars, it is likely that diversion pathways as an alternative to prison would cost more than the current status quo in Cambodia. This raises really important questions about investment and disinvestment. However, if you consider those wider and perhaps alternative economic indicators, improvements in the rates of recidivism, reduced suicides, improved mental health, strong family cohesion, and community safety, innovation can seem more affordable. Invest to save really can work in the long term. So in many respects, for me personally, when I think about the choices of how do we deal with young people in conflict with the law and the volume of young people, I don't think we can afford not to do this. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you for your time and attention, and happy to answer questions in the question and answer session. And finally, please do stay in touch with me in this life, because as they say, you never can have too many friends in this life. Thank you very much.